Hello.
Hi, this is Fam Electric Ghost. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Oh, great. Yeah, we just had a little technical glitch, but
Yeah, I could tell. No problem.
everything gets like resetting it.
Yeah, like many things.
So, Fam Electric Ghost, is my name on my podcast. I actually am a musician and producer myself, but I had this podcast for the last 2 years. We've been interviewing indie artists all over the world, and now we're talking to Shoefinger. So I'm glad you joined.
Indeed. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's really cool to be able to talk to indie artists around the world just using a smartphone.
Yeah, it's
Um,
very convenient.
yeah, yeah, it lets you talk to people from places you probably wouldn't be able to pay for the phone call. But yeah, so I sent you the list of questions that we usually use when we talk to artists. But I
hmm
was looking at your short bio on your Spotify, and
hmm
it said you're an experimental artist from San Diego, California, with
Um,
musical roots in hip hop and jazz and techno, house, noise, rock. But I think you're also from like England, right?
no, I'm not from England.
Oh, you're not from
I
California.
was I was born in Mexico,
Oh, Mexico.
Tijuana, Mexico.
Oh,
Um, and I moved to San Diego when I was pretty young. I was like about 5 years old, and then uh, I spent most of my time there up until going to college in Northern California and then coming back last year to San
oh.
Diego.
Well, I know what happened. I saw somebody from Norwood, Great Britain, that was listening to you, and
Uh,
I assumed that you were from London because of that. But sorry about that.
no, no problem.
Yeah, that's cool. So like your music is very much in the kind of like I love multiple genres, and I like artists that kind of mix genres. And the fact that you're doing like hip hop and jazz and techno and house and noise and rock, it's really interesting. I like to hear that kind of hybrid music. So
Yeah, I mean, I just try to somehow combine all of my influences and the things that I listen to without, making it too gimmicky or like reductive.
yeah, it's really interesting. I think my alter ego Josephine would love to like sing over some of your songs.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always looking for people for vocals.
Yeah, yeah,
As long as you let me like distort the hell out of them
yeah,
or
yeah.
not.
Yeah, well, I mean, Josephine is a creation of a vocoder in the first place.
I had read them, so maybe it's best to leave them alone if they're
No,
already distorted.
no, well, she goes all kinds of ways. So I mean, yeah, distortion would work. Uh, but yeah, it's just interesting. I was looking at your album. So your current album, um, is that like "How Is My Driving"? Is that the first? Is the current one, or is there another
That's
one?
the most recent one. Yeah, there's a couple coming that I've written all the songs, a couple EPs that I've written all the songs for, and I just haven't finished mixing them.
Hmm.
Um, but there's a lot of things coming. The part two for that, and then some other projects.
So you're part of a collective, or a collective publishes your stuff?
Yeah, Collective publishes my stuff, ebb&flow,
Ebb and
um,
Flow, yeah, artist collective. I was looking at that.
which is a pretty diverse group of people. Not all musicians. Some are like graphic designers and artists of various kinds, like rappers.
Oh, that's cool.
Um, but yeah, people I met in college, and they're nice enough to publish all my work on the streaming sites and stuff like that.
That's awesome. So let me get to the questions, and maybe we can kind of roll through how I usually do an interview.
Sure.
When did you first get into music? At what age?
Well, I think I've always been into music. My parents are very musical people. Uh, my dad is a dancer, uh, and he listened to a lot of traditional Latin American music and just blasted it at all hours of the day when I was growing up. So I've always had a lot of access to music, but I didn't really start um, playing music until I was like 7 or 8 years old. I took piano lessons for about 5 years, and then I switched to guitar when I was 12 or 13,
So,
and I'm
which is your
20.
favorite instrument? 'Cause I hear a lot of synthesizers and I hear guitar on your music. So, have you
It's
gotten back
probably
into getting the keyboards, or are you just using like soft synths or like DAWs?
it's my favorite is probably guitar. It's just the longest the instrument I've consistently work the most with. I've been playing like 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
Piano, I played for 5 years under like lessons, and I didn't really like lessons
Mm-hmm.
very much, so I just kind of quit and then didn't play piano for a really long time to focus on guitar. But then in with the advent of like synths and like me discovering like yeah synthesizers and pianos that I liked, piano
Mm-hmm.
sounds that I really liked, because when I was like a teenager, I started getting back into playing it.
Yeah, what I found is like I'm a showing my age. I'm like in my mid 50s, and I kind of grew up with the new wave, the new romantics,
Hmm.
and when instruments that were really iconic to me were like the Jupiter 8, the Juno 106, the Prophet 5. When those
Yeah.
synthesizers started getting used, or
Hmm.
even when Newman did, he used the Polymoog on cars.
Yeah,
Um,
no, I know exactly what you're talking about.
yeah, so that really got me into synths, and I got into Moogs, and I got into semi-modular Eurorack, and I just thought. And the thing about synths, it's not exactly like playing piano. You
No, it
you
isn't.
try, yeah, you actually try to emulate other instruments, and so you break a lot of rules, or you do things a lot differently than a straight piano player would do. Um, and so I think that got me. Also, as a musician, when you use a synth, you can kind of create the whole band. You
Oh
you can,
yeah,
you can do the bass, you can do the strings, you can do the guitar, you can do everything.
and also just as someone who works in electronics, the knob twiddling and the the was definitely something that
Noodling,
was appealing to me,
yeah.
and the science behind and like the acoustical physics part, because I'm a physicist. Uh,
Oh, so you must
Definitely.
be deep into it.
Oh yeah. So
Yeah.
when I first discovered like modular synthesis a couple years ago, I definitely took a huge deep
So you're into
dive.
subtractive synthesis, or are you into like
Yeah, I mean,
model
I I'm mostly into like I've been getting into FM synthesis
FM?
recently.
FM, yeah. I'm still kind of a Moog guy. I'm doing a heavy like subtractive just because I have Moogs, and
I
I've been playing with them inside of Euroracks.
Yeah,
And
I mean, I think if I had Moogs, I would be I'd be really into
yeah,
subtractive synthesis.
yeah. It was just that
You work with
there's
what you
just that
got.
there's something about because they're kind of I don't know, they're so hands on. Like any kind of modular synth is hands on, but they're like the original, and if you get into them, they're just there's something about them. They have a lot of character. They're hand built, kind of like guitars in a way, just because
Hmm.
they have
Absolutely.
a hand built nature, and each model, going back to the mini Moogs and the Model 55s and the Model 3s, and they all have character. They all they're all
Yeah,
different.
especially those analog synths. Definitely, like even the same instrument,
Yeah,
like two different copies of that same
yeah.
instrument will sound
Yeah,
slightly
you get
different,
a
and I think
Model D
that's
from '74, and you get one from like that was released in the December '74, and one that released in June of '74. They sound different.
yeah, they do, and they feel very different.
Yeah, and it's just
Unfortunately, I haven't had much access to those, but just being able to like play it in music
yeah,
stores and like the people that I know that do have those has definitely been mind
yeah.
blowing.
There's just something about their nature. I mean, they take a little while to warm up, and there's a technique. Like if I turn on my Moog and I play it before it warms up, it sounds totally different, and then I'll capture that stuff on tape and then use
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, I definitely experienced that with like tube
it. Yeah.
amps on the guitar
Oh, so
side.
you know what I'm talking. The same thing happens with the analog synths. It can that same kind of behavior, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So I mean that's I think guitar players and analog synth players can have some things in common in that we like to use like older technology or like the fact that we're playing like real instruments. Not that soft synths or DAWs are not instruments, but there's a different feeling when you actually play to me a physical instrument.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But I think to a certain point that difference can get mitigated if you're playing, even if you're playing a VST, if you have some kind of MIDI controller,
Yeah, yeah. If you
tweak the knobs on that MIDI controller, and you see the effects of, because I don't have modular synthesizers physically, but I work a lot in like
Yeah,
VCV
yeah,
rack,
yeah,
if you
yeah.
know what that
They can emulate a lot.
um, and with just like a MIDI controller, just assigning the knobs on the MIDI controller to like LFOs and whatever in VCV rack is a pretty like physical experience, and it does feel like you're playing an
Yeah, I
instrument.
think when you play that knob per function and you're not like I guess there's a difference between like a musician and a producer and a person that's got musical capabilities and somebody who's more of a DJ that's running something off a CDJ. Um, I think
Mm-hmm.
like if you've got musical theory behind you, or you've got the I don't know that you're inventive, that you want to go in and actually not just use a preset or a sample, you want to create the tone.
Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
think that is a different type of experience, because you're kind of sound engineering and creating at the same time.
Yeah.
And whatever tool you use to do that sound generation, if you're doing that kind of sound generation, that you're building stuff from scratch, yeah, I give props to people doing that, because that's kind of, I come from the tradition of like guys like Keith Emerson, and going back
Mm-hmm.
in the day, like Bernie Worrell from Funkadelic, people who actually built the tones.
Yeah, absolutely. Just creating that
Yeah,
whole
I think that
profile.
is like part of electronic music, was actually using these instruments to create the timbres, to create the tones. And,
And I think in the end, it makes it sound a little cooler because it's something that, you don't hear very
yeah,
often if it's not
yeah,
like
I
a
think the
preset.
problem sometimes today, everybody's using the same sample, they're using the same,
Oh yeah.
thing out the box, and then
And and it really depends, because if you're just using it to like make a beat, or which is like something that I did for a while, was just like make beats and sell them to
yeah,
like
yeah,
SoundCloud rappers, because in college that definitely helped me
yeah,
like
yeah,
pay
yeah,
bills. But when you're doing that and you have to just crank out a bunch of beats, sometimes it's more time and cost effective to just go into like Omnisphere or Nexus and just you pick a preset and make something really quick. But when I wanted to make my own music and not just something that someone would like rap over, I definitely focused a lot more on the sound engineering.
yeah. I think it's just to differentiate yourself. It's like if you're using samples and loops and you're grabbing stuff like Fruity Loop or something, that's cool. But if you actually take like a real 808, or you take like
Mm-hmm.
a Moog DFAM, and you build a beat from an analog drum machine from scratch, there's something about doing that just gives you like your own profile. It gives you something that's a little different. Uh,
Yeah, and I mean, I think people can tell, even if they don't think that they can tell, even if people don't really know what's going on, like the very specifics of like the sound, people can tell the difference between, you know,
yeah,
at least subconsciously, between like a stock 808 from the stuff that comes with Fruity Loops and something that was like recorded.
yeah. It's like there's like I don't know if you describe it, like if you take like a analog drum machine, like a drum brute or a
Mm-hmm.
DFAM, and you build something from scratch, versus like sampling something and grabbing something that was already out there. This again, I don't know. There's a dynamicism, and kind of like college radio, going back to like that day between. If you go back and listen to a band like REM, right, and you go back and listen
Mm-hmm.
to like the Replacements or Who's to Do, there's something about that's authentic about that kind of rawness that you can get.
Yeah,
And I
absolutely.
think some of that stuff today, I would argue, sounds antiseptic. It sounds too clean. If it's too
Yeah,
clean,
and I think,
sometimes that's a problem for me.
yeah, I mean, I agree. I think most of the samples that get passed around that you can just find on the internet have also just gotten the absolute heck
Yeah,
compressed out of them. And that's just like a technological issue after a while, but it does make things kind of
yeah. I
stale.
think the staleness of it is like the whole idea. Like when Moog created his instruments, he wanted them to be used live. The
Yeah.
idea of doing electronic music was to kind of be like a jam band, like the Allman Brothers, and actually go out and do very experimental stuff live, and kind of running it do sequencers or loops and stuff kind of takes the life out of it. If you don't
Oh yeah.
play it kind of like a jazz musician and do some, noodling and just kind of go off. I think that always makes it fresher if you kind of can go off and then come back to it. And I use sequencers, and I'm a one man band, and so there's stuff I have that's preset, but there's a lot of stuff I play live. It's just
Yeah.
live playing. There's nothing ever kind of goes away, takes away from it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree.
So when did you realize that you could actually write your own music? Like you started getting into guitar, but there are people that learn an instrument and they never write their own material. They play other people's material. They become studio musicians or something. I mean, they don't decide that they're going to be like their own artist. They're going to write their own stuff. When did you think that you could do that?
Well, I think like from the second I started wanted to write my music. I was actually decent at my instrument because I was afraid of writing like really terrible music, which is what would have happened if I had started writing music. I think when I was first starting, I would set like goals for myself where I would like learn a specific song that I thought was really good, and then once I could play that song really well, for guitar, it was Black Magic Woman by Carlos
Okay.
Santana. Well, the first like 2 or 3 years, I was just learning like random like Smoke on the Water and all the things that you learn when you're learning guitar. But once I could like play a full song that was kind of like jazzy and not super like incredibly easy to play, and I mastered that, and I was like, okay, now I'm gonna start writing my own music, and I have some of the fundamentals to make it not
Yeah,
sound
so you had to get
absolutely
some
terrible.
foundational capability, which is I think typical of most musicians. They got to build up that confidence that you can master what your instrument, and then from there you can kind of you always like can learn new things. You never I don't think you ever fully I think if you always push yourself, you never fully master your instrument. If you start going different ways, you kind of get yourself in a place where you're not comfortable, but that's kind of cool. Um, but
But
I understand. Like you got to feel confident enough that you have something to say, or you can master your instrument to a certain level that you feel that people want to hear what you're doing.
yeah, I think it was probably 2 years into playing guitar, so that was probably 14 or 15, and I had like an early iPad, or I think it might have been the iPod
Yeah.
Touch first, and it had
Oh, so you use
GarageBand on
GarageBand
it.
first?
Yeah, and then I got one of those little
Oh,
iRig
yeah.
things. No, it was like
USB
the
interface.
predecessor
Yeah,
to
USB
iRig.
interface, so
Yeah,
you could like link a guitar to it.
so I could plug my guitar into the iPad, and then I just tapped on the screen to play all the
Yeah,
drums.
I mean that's yeah. At the beginning, everybody starts at a certain place. Um, so have you moved to like digital audio workstations and
Yeah, well these days I mostly work in FL Studio and
Ableton?
Ableton sometimes.
You got cut off.
It depends on what I'm
So
going
you use
for.
Ableton Live or full
Oh,
Ableton?
Ableton Live and
FL
FL
Studio too.
Studio.
Okay, yeah. I work with an artist that uses FL Studio. Um, I'm kind of weird, and I use hardware digital recorders. I use Zoom R16 and
Oh, cool.
R24s because I kind of grew up like,
Yeah, no,
well,
that's
I
cool.
grew up using Tascam 4 tracks and 8 tracks. And so
Yeah.
to me, my natural progression was like I looked at DAWs, but I didn't like what happened because, I have analog synths. And what I found is when I brought
Yeah.
my Moog into Ableton, it would compress the hell out of it. And
No,
compared,
absolutely.
yeah.
I think if I was in your situation, I would have done the exact
So
same
I ended
thing.
up bringing it,
I
yeah,
just when I
into digital recorder, just because I don't like losing it. But
yeah, and I was used to that method of recording because actually I used GarageBand for the instruments, but I didn't actually record in GarageBand. I recorded in like one of those like 4-track
Oh, track apps.
apps
Yeah.
that were on the yeah, where I would just loop something and then just overdub and overdub and overdub until the song was over.
Well, I think doing overdubs in that kind of way sometimes creates a lot of really cool experimentation. Uh, what I call.
Yeah, I mean, I look back on some of those recordings, and they weren't that
Well,
bad.
if you go back, what used to be done on the reel to reels in the old 8-track, 16-track, analog studios. There's something about punch in, punch out, overdubbing that allows you to kind of capture things and not go crazy trying. I mean, you perfect things, but you can't go crazy
Hmm.
as you can with a DAW.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think given the chance, if I ever got to work in like a super nice studio that had like reel to reel tapes, I would absolutely take
Yeah,
that chance
you'd
to.
want to go with an
Yeah,
analog recording capability if you could.
yeah,
Yeah, I think it's like a lot of people are going that way nowadays, or trying to go back and finding like a Neve board and trying to get like actual tape, especially guys who are using like analog synths. Can we find
hmm,
that if we take our analog synths and we have all these expensive analog synths and we try to bring in the Ableton, we don't hear what we heard, through the air.
yeah, that
And
definitely
so,
something in the
yeah, the
conversion.
conversion doesn't work. And so, if you're going to have those instruments, it's better to bring them right into a Zoom or into a Tascam Model 24 or to a reel-to-reel tape machine. Just because it's like playing an acoustic guitar, I'd rather capture it with an analog mic system if I could.
Yeah,
Just because I think it picks up a
definitely.
lot more. Um,
I think that would be the way that I would go if I was, you know, working in a studio or something. But the way that things have worked out so far, most of my, most of the synths that I have are digital,
yeah, I mean that's
and
the way
things
the
that I've
world is. There's
created
so many digital kind of synths or soft synths or VSTs that you can capture, into FL Studio or into a DAW. But like in the last
yeah,
5 years, there has been this big resurgence in hardware synths. And so
yeah,
there's so many of the companies that died, because Moog and Profit were gone, and now they're back. And so
yeah,
the ability to be able to get like a Grandmother or a Profit X or Rev 2, these are machines that are actually better than some of the machines from the 80s.
yeah, or definitely I want to look into getting one of those Behringer copies of like the Model
Yeah,
D,
the Model.
because I've heard it sounds like very close to the
Yeah,
real
the
thing.
replication of the Model D, the Behringer Model D is pretty close to a real D, and companies like Behringer are pretty cool because they're putting out like the SH-101 is pretty authentic. That their clone of the SH-101, which is like iconic Roland, their version of it is pretty good, and even their
Yeah,
808
and
drum machine is pretty good. So that kind of gives people
I've also
an
heard that.
ability to get the real analog, which I would suggest with those budget Behringer products is more. You're more likely to be able to grab that, and then
Yeah, and I already have experience with their like guitar pedals, because when I started, I would only get like stuff off eBay, and I would get like the Behringer Tube Screamer
Mhm.
clone, or build them myself.
Yep.
And I do know that like even though they're not as like sturdy as something like a
Oh yeah.
Boss pedal, I wasn't like when I was starting, I wasn't like playing live anywhere. I was just in my room. I
Yeah,
wasn't
you
going to
don't
be
have to
like
worry. You don't have to
destroying
you don't have to
them.
worry about blasting it out.
Yeah, so I didn't need the like high end tube overdrive from
Yeah, I don't need
boutique.com.
a Moog Frogger,
Exactly.
but yeah, I mean, I think it's cool that there are now hardware synths that are affordable. So it gives people an option now when it said, "Oh, I can't afford the hardware," but now there are some that I think are. I think it gives people a palette. I've collected over the years a lot of hardware synths, and it just I like having the palette, the sonic palette that they give you. So
Hmm.
when they make them more affordable, then I'm always encouraging people like, yeah, it's a good way to go if you can get into it. Because it will just give you a sound that nobody else is going to have. There's a
Yeah, I
variability with
think
these machines that will give you like sonic enjoyment for the rest of your life.
yeah, and also just the fact that they're more available means that that music gets brought back into the mainstream a little bit,
Yeah, well,
like
I
music
just
that's made
wanted to
with
kind
hardware
of bring
synths.
that new wave, new romantic sound, or even a progressive Emerson, Lake and Palmer, the Brio to bring that kind of sound, Rick Wakeman sound. I mean, just because those guys, they were merging like classical with jazz,
Oh
with
yeah,
rock, and the progressive stuff they used to hear from bands like Yes and Emerson, Lake and Palmer. I mean, it's
yeah, and like
yeah, like
Genesis,
Genesis, like Peter Gabriel Genesis.
King
Yeah, there's
Crimson.
something about that music that's electronic music to me, and that's what I grew up on. And later like Brian Eno and the stuff that like Bowie was doing in Berlin, and bands like Kraftwerk, they kind of took a different direction, but it's still cool to kind of have that base of knowledge in electronic music where you're not just trance or EDM. Not that those are bad, but I think
Yeah.
the progressive genre allows more experimentation and a wider range of things you can do. Um,
Hmm.
that you could mix EDM and then go off and do something classical and then go off and do something jazz and bring it back to EDM. But sometimes EDM
Yeah,
and trance kind of get locked into just staying in their own genre.
I do agree. And I think that there's been a little bit of a resurgence in experimentalism, but less so in like in trance and stuff like that, and more in techno and house, which is the stuff that I listen to
Yeah, I
the
hear that
most.
you're not locked into that, which is cool.
Yeah, I think I've
I
seen a
see that
lot
you're
of
kind
really
of
cool
like
stuff come out
have a
of.
wider reference point that you kind of go off on your albums in a lot of different directions, which is I think that's always good as a musician.
Yeah, sometimes to a fault. Sometimes I have to like rein myself in and be like, well, isn't there supposed to be like an underlying concept or something that all these songs have in common? And then, the other half of me thinks, screw
No, I think the
it.
screw it attitude is always good because I think that you never know when you're experimenting, what somebody's going to dig and what they won't dig. And, self editing, and you self edit yourself when you're an artist, but the wider your reference points, you never know what song's going to actually kick with people. And,
Yeah, I definitely agree
and
with
so
that.
like you could do something and say, well, everybody wants me to stay in this. But when you actually break out and you do something that like the one song that's different on your record could be the one song that really kicks, you know?
Yeah, and I think it does help me that, you know, I've been spending a lot more time doing music, but it's still not like my full-time job. So rely on it for like as my main source of income. I'm not really afraid of taking risks or like doing things that people won't necessarily like.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the whole thing with the indie genre is like a lot of us, we're not like totally professional musicians where we're living off what we do. And so we can go and
Hmm.
create things that aren't necessarily, top 10, top 100, we're creating kind of music because we want to create it, that we love it. And so
Exactly.
I think,
Yeah,
that's where SoundCloud artists are, that's where, a lot of Spotify artists are,
absolutely.
is like that we're able to kind of do some stuff. And then later people might find a lot of bands like the Velvet Underground weren't found until after their heyday. A band like Big Star, Alex Chilton,
Yeah.
that wasn't found. There's a lot of stories of people doing what they wanted and then the world catching up later.
Yeah, that's definitely a very common theme
Yeah.
in music and even in electronic music too. There's a big resurgence like of some of the 90s like UK garage scene in modern day like booty house for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely. I think there's always that kind of like. There's always going to be people on the leading edge, and they might not like be as successful in the time that they're playing. Then people go back and they look at what they did, and they're like,
And they're like,
"Yeah,
"Oh,
that's
this was
cool."
cool.
Let's
Let's
try to
try this
do it
again."
again. That always happens.
Yeah,
And
I
I think
agree.
like as a musician, you think a lot of times like if you're in it because you want to be in the top 10, if you don't hit the top 10, you're going to get out of it. that's a different type of musician than the one that's doing it because they love it. Um,
Yeah, and I think that music tends to last longer, definitely, precisely because people find it out later. It tends to like transcend what music was popular during that time, and then if it can be rediscovered 10 years later, if that rediscovery doesn't work out 20 years later, it
oh
might
yeah,
work
I mean
out.
everything
So
that gets put down, people go back. It's like the whole history of like rock and roll. Is people went and found like Lead
and
Belly, they found Lightning Hopkins, they found all these great blues guys like Keith Richards,
yeah,
and the guys in the Who and Led Zeppelin, Jimmy Page, all those guys. They found they found all these like Texas blues.
yeah, like grainy recordings of
Yeah,
Robert
Johnson,
Johnson
Lead
and
Belly,
like
and
Blind Lemon
yeah, all these guys,
Jefferson.
and then that stuff never was super big, but it became the building blocks of what we know as rock, as like traditional hardcore rock,
Yeah,
and so it got all brought back. In the '60s, all that
and
stuff was everywhere. You were hearing Lead Belly everywhere. You were hearing it in Led Zeppelin, Cream, and everything. Uh,
yeah, and sometimes in those cases, it wasn't even just the bedrock. It was like a
yeah, well,
ripoff
like
almost.
Jimmy Page was accused a lot of times of not actually citing that he was using Lead Belly.
Yeah,
Where like Keith Richards was more willing to actually
yeah.
be,
Some people were more
transparent about
transparent
where,
about
yeah,
their
Keith Richards like
influences.
loves those guys, and so he
Yeah,
always would like say, I'm using, Lightning and Hopkins, I'm using Lead Belly, I'm doing that.
but right now there's bands that are sounding exactly like
Oh
Led
yeah,
Zeppelin,
yeah, I know which one you're
and
talking about.
and giving no credit whatsoever. I won't
I know
mention
who
any
you're talking about.
names.
Yeah, they got the look, they got the feel. They're not doing the exact song, but they're in the same space. Yeah,
But it's like the same energy, the voice, the
well, the
drums,
look. I mean, they got the look. Yeah,
Yeah,
but I mean,
definitely.
I don't have a problem with people like liking, the band. But one of my favorite bands, Big Star, was like a clone of the Beatles, but they weren't exactly. Uh,
Yeah, I mean, I've listened to
yeah,
some
but
Big
I
Star
think Big
before.
Star sounds different than the Beatles, but they kind of come from the
Oh
Beatles.
yeah,
But they were different enough that it was, they were better to me than Badfinger. They had a unique sound. It wasn't like Badfinger was kind of a total clone, but Big Star is not.
yeah. I think
Big Star is kind of like,
I think that's the way to go. Is more than a clone, just like get that same energy but execute it
yeah, it's like the
differently.
idea of power pop that Big Star took actually ended up being a big influence to bands like REM and the Replacements and Who's Kado, and like early alternative, college radio in the early '80s was heavily influenced by Alex Chilton and Big Star. In the same way, a lot of people were
Yeah,
influenced by
I can
by the
absolutely see that.
Velvets, by the Velvet Underground. They're to me is like they're just as influential as the Velvets in a way. Because you got guys like Smashing Pumpkins were influenced by them, REM, the Replacements, Who's Kado, and so many bands from the '80s that were really inspired by Big Star. And I'm a keyboardist, but Big Star, the sound, the structure of their songs is just really, really good writing.
Yeah, I mean that's something that you saw that was a lot more common.
Yeah, that's what's disappointing today when you hear some of the people today. You don't see the level of songcraft. I mean, there are some bands
At
that are
least,
doing it. They create soundcraft that's like what was then, but there's a lot of stuff in the top 10 that's not the same as like the top 10 in '72.
yeah. I mean, I'll agree on that, but I also think that you just have to know where to look because I do think there's a really blossoming experimental
Oh
rock
yeah, I
scene
think you
with like
can't.
math rock stuff.
If you look at the major radio, there's a big difference. But if you look where you're talking about, yeah, there are great bands that are not getting the credit that they should. They're living in the underground. That's where everything is. I mean,
Hmm.
everything that's good is like not on the radio.
Yeah, but I actually think that there's some bands that are starting to make it out on the radio.
Okay.
Like one of my favorite math rock bands, Chon, just played like
Oh
Coachella,
yeah, yeah. There's people starting to break through into the circuit.
which was yeah really
I just
surprising.
want them to break through more because some things like
I do wish
yeah, I
they
think
would
the
more.
radio
Yeah, I
programmers
agree.
aren't giving some of these bands the due they should get. Um, but that's the way things are. But yeah, I think eventually, like YouTube and SoundCloud and all these other Instagram, all these other venues. That's kind of like another question, is because of the social media capabilities of these new platforms like Spotify and SoundCloud and Instagram, artists like yourself are able to get out there. So what do you feel about that? And then also the flip side of it, compared to being like in the 70s, you had to get through the gatekeeper and get on a label
Mm-hmm.
to have your music out there. And then you were somewhat supported if you made it, and you could tour and do all these things. What's your opinion on the way things are now as an artist compared to then?
Well, I do like that there's no longer that kind of gatekeeper for myself. Um, I do think that it lends itself to like, literally anyone can make music. And sometimes it's not like the music that they make isn't great, but like sometimes it means that people who are great musicians that wouldn't have had the same opportunities because they didn't know the right people now can make a name for themselves just by uploading to Instagram or whatever. So I think it's a net positive just because it's worked out for me
Yeah, I think it's
and for many people that I
yeah, I
wouldn't have
think the only
otherwise.
problem is this, I guess, trying to get yeah, I guess depends on how you can manage yourself to get in front of audiences, you know. And
Yeah, I think there's a difference between just getting your music out there and actually if you want to make a career
yeah,
out of it. When it comes to like you really want to start touring, then you have to make a deeper dive into like doing live shows and getting to know, A&Rs and people in industry.
yeah, then that's where the record
And
companies actually helped with that whole structure, with the road
yeah,
managers and tour managers and the linkage to the clubs, and that's where they can get you, to be an opening act and get you on a tour and get you into the scene. Where a lot of it now you have to kind of do yourself, or you got to manage that. It's hard as an artist to kind of do that. If you're driven, you do it. You've got a group, keep on doing it, you work on it. But back in the day, I mean, having the companies to do that was part of the whole deal. But
yeah. I guess yeah, it just means that the do it yourself, you know, ideology has its pros and cons.
yeah, it's just harder to me to break out, um, in a big way doing that. I mean, you kind of have to have kind of grassroots, word of mouth, and just be pushing it and get to the right places. And if you when you're not doing it full time, it's hard to do that.
Yeah. But I also think that it helps if just one person in like your small niche community of people on Instagram makes it. A lot of the times that artist will reach back out and like look and scout for new talent. And if they got signed to like an indie or even a major label, they can be like, oh, there's all these other people in the community that I came from,
Oh yeah,
uh, that are just as talented as me. Here they are.
yeah. It's the collective kind of
You should try to
idea.
sign
Yeah,
them.
collectives like bringing in other people and then having like that whole scene get signed. you know,
I think, and in that
yeah.
way, that is something that happens.
That's something you're involved in with your group, right? Because you're in a collective, so that's the whole kind of purpose of the collective, right?
Yeah, definitely the the good of the person is the good of the collective.
Yeah, that's cool. So, have you been doing shows, or are you primarily like a Spotify online artist, or do you physically do shows?
Right now, I'm not doing any shows. When I was in college, I was a little bit more in touch with the scene because it was a smaller town. I went to UC Davis in Northern California. Um, I used to like play like open mics
Mm-hmm.
and like bars and stuff like that. Uh,
But now you're
but
primarily like
I,
online.
right now, yeah, right now as it stands, I'm mostly on the internet, but also part of that is because I don't have as much knowledge of like the San Diego DIY scene, and part of it is because I'm not totally sure what my live show would look like considering the kind of music that I make.
Yeah, yeah,
And I'm still kind of planning that out, but I do think that in not too long I will be playing some shows.
yeah. I mean, I think the whole thing is like what I started doing is I do like Facebook live shows for my studio. So I got like a home studio, and then I got myself like my iPhone hooked up to a Go mixer from Roland, and I hooked it up to my R24, and then I get a soundboard recording that goes right onto Facebook Live. And
Yeah, I
then
mean that's an effective
and
use of
then
those
you can kind of
platforms.
practice doing a show, and then see what kind of impact you have on Facebook or these other platforms, and you can practice actually doing a live show from the comfort of your studio, and then as you get stronger, then take it onto the road and figure out how to bring it to the road. Um,
Yeah, I think I think that's a pretty good idea. It's something that I could implement when the
yeah,
time
it's just a
comes.
cool way to do it. And when you do the soundboard recordings, you don't actually have to make a lot of noise.
Yeah.
Because because I'm an electronic artist, it doesn't like generate any noise. Everything is going through the ether. So
Yeah.
so it just is somewhat cool because you can do a show at like 10 o'clock at night. And the loudest thing is like your voice. You're not hearing like all the drums and everything coming through because everything's going from coming out of the R24 right into the Go mixer, which is it gives you
Yeah.
a cool way of doing it. Um, even your guitar, if you ran a guitar through, you just hear like the strumming. You wouldn't hear the
Yeah. I
loudness
also
of it. It
think
would all go through the ether. So it does give a lot of artists capability. I think they're actually even making ways for people to donate through some platforms.
mhm.
They actually can give you donations if you start doing good. So
Yeah, I mean I've thought about that playing on
yeah,
Twitch
yeah,
because I know that there's a community of musicians on Twitch, and I I do play some video games, and I've thought about like playing, using Twitch
yeah,
for what it's for like streaming video games. But but recently I've been thinking about, I've been seeing some like musicians and especially like guitarists and bassists and drummers uh, with Twitch channels, and that's something that I've been seriously
yeah.
considering for
That's
sure.
good. I mean, I'm glad they're opening it up beyond the video games. I mean, the video games are cool, but opening it up to other
Yeah.
things is awesome because musicians always we need more like MTV like platforms because MTV has kind of gone away from music. It
Yeah.
used to be, but back in the
Definitely.
day, you had 120 minutes a show. They used to have like alternative college radio bands. You could watch it for like 2 hours and see all these bands, and you don't really see a lot of that on the music channels. It's all like real life TV shows, and everything's on the net. Like
Yeah,
on Twitch or YouTube or Instagram or Facebook. It's all these platforms, which is cool. But they're kind of net based platforms, so you don't have that kind of re. You know,
you have to kind of start your community on your own for
yeah.
sure.
I mean, you take what you have today. I mean, YouTube can launch you, but it's a big platform. You can, it's hard to get a lot of people to get into it if you're like new. Uh,
Yeah, definitely. But I think Instagram is a little bit better for the
oh yeah,
grassroots,
definitely.
and then once you start to build a following, you can start uploading videos on YouTube, and like if you can get like the people that already like your content to just click on the YouTube link, that starts to drive up the
Yeah,
views, and people on YouTube who are just looking for new stuff will come across it just because of the
yeah. I said
algorithms.
I was originally a SoundCloud artist. I hit like 80,000 listens, and then Anchor approached me about doing this podcast. And I started doing this podcast, and I went from like 1,000 listens to 18,000. Um,
Mm,
and now I have sponsors, and and then I use it to kind of push my music, and then I got picked up by a label in New York, so I actually have a distribution
nice.
label with Bentley Music out of New York City. Um, but I'm 51. It took me 30 years to get signed.
I mean, on your own
Yeah,
time.
you do it on your own time. You do it because you keep on going. Everybody I started with stopped. When I was 17, I was in the
Yeah.
basement in the garage. Everybody stopped, got married. I'm married, but I didn't stop. I just kept on going, and then
I'm
that's what
glad.
happened to me. If you're dedicated, eventually people will get to you or find you, and that's what happened with me. And people started to find what I'm doing, and I got a little niche, but it's bigger than what it was in the basement back when I was 17.
I mean, I would hope so.
But now I'm talking to people all over the world, and it's cool. And I finally got a deal. But like it shows you, like if you're dedicated to what you believe and you stick to your guns, you'll get it done.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't really see myself ever stopping, even if it's like doing it on the side. It's not something I think I would be able to quit, just because I think that'd be terrible for my like
No, I
own
think like
mental
art,
health.
art is like breathing. Like a painter's not going to stop painting just because they're not like Monet. They're not
Successful
Monet.
or like
You're not
making money. Yeah.
Renoir. You're going to do it because you love it. And
Yeah, exactly.
music is like the same way. Most of the musicians I know, they'll do anything to play a gig. They'll drive like 6-10 hours to go play a gig, and then maybe they don't even get paid, but just to
Yeah.
play. You know, Usually like pure musician, they just want to get in front of people and play. And I know drummers
Yeah.
will just go really long distances just so they can play a live gig. You know,
Yeah, and that's I respect
just
drummers a lot
yeah,
because they have they have all the equipment. They have to set up
yeah,
all of their drums over and over
yeah.
again. I when I was in bands in college, I I was so glad that all I had was like my guitar, my amp, and my pedal board, and I didn't have to like screw in every single
Oh
ride and
yeah,
cymbal.
drummers have it hard. They got to carry their stuff. They got to have like a van or a truck.
That is a
Yeah, yeah,
pain.
it's hard. I mean, the drum machines have kind of taken some stuff away from them. But if you're a rock band, you still need a real drummer.
Yeah.
So if you're more rock oriented, you're gonna have a real drummer. I don't have a drummer. I've played with drummers. I love playing with live drummers.
Mhm.
It's nothing like playing with a live drummer. I love it.
There, no,
I
there's
love
there
it.
isn't. You're
Every time
right.
I get to do it, I relish the moment because I love it. Because I go into my drum machine and I'll do something, but it's like it's never gonna be what a real drummer could do.
I fully agree.
I try to do the best I can, but like a real drummer will always, just like a real bass player. If you play bass on your Moog and you do as good as you can do pretty good on a Moog. But you get somebody that really knows bass, and you're like, man, yeah, you take it.
Yeah, that's something that I think the the next time that I decide to do shows, I'll bring not only my guitar, but I'll get a bass guitar because I think just having that bass and being able to improvise little random things that you can add to the
Oh
bass
yeah,
melody makes a big difference in how people
yeah. I
respond to
mean,
your music.
playing a bass against like a drum track that's on a drum machine or something, playing a real live bass, that's a pretty cool thing. I mean, there's things you could do with that. I've actually done that in a couple of places, but yeah, I mean, any kind of live mix, yeah, because like a lot of what I do is I'll simulate different instruments and then mute other ones because I'm a one man band, and so when I
Mm-hmm.
run my show, I mean, a lot of times I'm playing the board, the keys, but sometimes I'm playing bass, sometimes I'm playing the drums, sometimes I'm doing whatever, it's whatever I feel the song needs to be played live, then that part will be played live on that instrument. Um, but I think that's when you figure out how you're gonna do your live show. There's all kinds of things you can do. Um, Even if you're a one-person band, there's a lot of cool things you can do today with all the tools that are out there.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely look forward to planning all that
Yeah, it's
out.
just fun. I mean, I do it because it's fun. If it stresses you out, then you have to probably think about it.
Yeah.
but music, it should make you happy. It shouldn't make you go pull your hair out unless you're trying to make your masterpiece, and then maybe that does that. But
Yeah, sometimes it's like maybe the music making process usually doesn't make me pull my hair out. It's usually the
oh,
mixing.
the mixing, yeah, mixing is a whole nother thing. I
the,
kind of, I do the best I can, and then I give it to my engineers. But yeah, I mean, if you're a solo artist, you do a lot of engineering yourself. I mean, you use a lot of tools to try to get the sound the best you can, and then when you can get to another level, you give it to a professional recording engineer just because they went to school for that. But
yeah.
yeah, I mean, you can spend a lot of time going through mixes, and I'll go crazy making multiple variations. But a lot of times, what I find is like my original mix is usually better
That
than
happens to
the
me
tenth
too.
the tenth one I
Yeah,
did.
usually when I spend more than well, I usually spend like a day or two like writing songs, and then if it's like a really hard guitar part, I'll spend like another day like getting it down perfectly, and then I'll spend another day or two on the mix. But times when the mix is really frustrating and I spend like 4 or 5 days on the mix and the mastering, it's usually because I just don't like the song and I end up just scrapping
Yeah, I
it.
guess if you find out you're doing that much on it, it's kind of like if I have a song and I got to keep on doing my vocals like 10, 20 times, then I know it's not as good as if I did a song and then the first or second or third take, I got it. I'm kind of a
Yeah.
feel person. Like if I usually like the song is good if I can get it on the third or second take. If I got to do like 10 takes, then I usually like leave it alone and go back to it later.
Yeah, no, I mean that's exactly how I work too.
Yeah, I think a lot of artists do that because you find yourself like being tortured, and you don't want to be in a situation where you go and do a song like 100 times. If you've got to go do it 100 times, by like the 50th time or 20th time, you should have figured out that maybe that's not working. But
That's why I would also just get bored sometimes. So I really feel for like artists, especially like rappers who get
yeah,
like one really big song and then they have to perform it like every day for the next like
yeah,
year. God, I would hate that.
yeah. I mean, they have to refine their stuff, so they probably do a lot. But I'm more of an atmospheric, stream of conscience type of artist. So
Yeah.
I tend to go with my gut feel. I kind of do it from like a spoken word standpoint. So a lot of my stuff started from being
Hmm.
poetry. So I kind of,
Yeah.
if it feels right or if it flows, I'm gonna stick with like the stuff that flows better and not really dive into it. Though I know like rappers and hip guys are more precise and they'll go wordsmith their stuff, and it takes probably a lot more than what I do. But
But it probably depends on the
yeah, it depends. I mean, some guys are natural and they just get it out.
yeah, definitely like freestylers, people who just seem to have a knack for that can just come up with absolutely ridiculous word
Yeah,
plays and double entendres, triple entendres,
yeah.
just right off the bat.
Like one of my favorites, like Earl Sweatshirt. I just like his delivery. Um,
I love Earl.
yeah, and
He's
I
great.
think he kind of seems natural. He seems like kind of just flows. Uh,
He absolutely uh, has a knack
and
for
then, yeah, a
that,
lot of times
and
he
also
just
just
puts it out like second, third take. I think that's what he likes to do, and it works because it's just well defined the way he just has this like narrative that he can put out. He's like a Dylan, like a rap Dylan.
yeah, and I think he gets a lot of that from like he really likes MF Doom,
Yeah, MF Doom's
and
awesome.
I
I mean, that's like kind of my style. I like that kind of stuff.
and I think he gets all of the right elements from Doom, but definitely makes like brings it up to speed in like the year that he's actually
Yeah,
working
his
on.
last
You
album.
know, not that Doom is like out of
No,
date, but Earl is like
well,
young.
Earl's good. His choice of samples on some rap songs is like brilliant. The way
Yeah,
what he did
absolutely.
with it and how he sampled those soul songs and then mixed in like drum machines and samples. And he just did it in a really elegant way.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that goes to the producer too. I think Alchemist worked
Yeah,
on that,
Alchemist worked with
and
them, and he calls himself some random black dude. He's like Earl.
yeah,
That's his
that's
producer
his
name.
like producer
Yeah, so
tag,
he actually does a lot
and
of his stuff. I mean, he has Alchemist came in, but he does a lot of his own stuff. People will be surprised. Um, but yeah,
I heard that. I remember in like a Vice interview or something.
so you're working on a new project, a bunch of new projects you mentioned. Um, so what do you think your release dates for those projects are going to be?
Well, I still have a couple songs that I have to finish on one of them. The other is pretty much done. I'm just mixing. So the the soonest one will probably be like 2 or 3 weeks. The next one would be 4 weeks from
That's
now.
awesome. So have you thought of collaborating with other like-minded artists or different artists in different genres? Like a rock
Yeah,
vocalist or a
absolutely.
punk rock vocalist or a female vocalist.
Yeah, I mean, anyone whose art that I appreciate, I would like to collaborate with. I'm really not picky about genre
Oh,
in
that's
terms
cool.
of that, just because, uh, there is a lot of, mixed genre stuff in my stuff anyways. So if I can get someone who's really, really good at like, their niche thing, yeah, that's definitely always a plus.
Yeah, because I think your music with some vocals on it from like a female vocalist or a hip hop vocalist or even a spoken word vocalist, electronic craziness, would be cool. I think it would, because your
I
songs would like
definitely
lend
agree.
itself to somebody could interpret, or you got, depends on what you want, because there's some artists like
Yeah.
you've got your vision for what you did, and then somebody comes and does something that might not be your vision. So it's a collaboration. You got to find somebody that fits what your overall, it's probably not gonna be exactly what you would do, but it's something that you want. They think that doesn't clash with what you do.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm pretty hands off about that kind of stuff. If I respect the artist, then I respect their vision for the song. And at the end of the day, if I'm collaborating with someone on a song, it's not really my song anymore. The way I see it, it's, our
Well, that's
song.
cool. Yeah, that's like the 50-50 collab. Like REM, they do like 25, 25, 25, 25. Um, that they
Yeah.
they felt like, okay, everybody's contributing, so they kind of just opened it up that way. Where you got other bands like the Eagles, the famous Eagles, they got the whole thing where Don Henley and they just felt they can. Everybody else was like work for hire for them. Like Joe Walsh
Yeah.
was like work for hire. Really?
Which is
Joe
crazy.
Walsh is like work for hire. It's like Joe Walsh is
Joe
Joe
Walsh
Walsh.
shouldn't be anyone's work
Yeah,
for
I mean,
hire.
yeah, all those other guys is like, really? Everybody in that band was like at the top of their game, and only you guys think you're the only ones. I mean, that's a problem when you get bands like that. But yeah, I think like the success story for a band is respecting the other musician.
Yeah, I think the best collaborations happen when it's not just like someone coming in and getting paid for a feature, but like someone going into the studio and working and like talking to the person. I think that lends itself to the best collaborations.
Yeah, I think
And
you
it,
have an honest love for an artist, not just a love for the paycheck. I think it's
yeah,
you like a lot of things today with the features. I'm like, okay, are you doing that feature because you dig this person or you dig the money?
yeah, I think, and that's something that definitely disappoints me is when like a cool rapper or artist that I really respect just goes in and does like an absolutely trash feature on like a popular song. Not because they're like a bad artist, but just because they just wanted to get paid and get the
Yeah,
heck
well, a lot
out.
of times, like that's what happens with the labels. Will try to get you doing stuff like that. If you get on labels,
Yeah,
that's what they want to do. And to me, it's like I kind of go from the period like back when artists would just collab because they were into it. You know, they
yeah,
they saw Jimi Hendrix and they wanted to sit in. They saw Dylan and they
yeah.
wanted to sit in. They saw the band and they wanted to jump in. People just did it because you know they wanted to feel that or they wanted to get in. Yeah,
For
for the
the
right
right
reason because
reasons.
it's like I think I can bring something to that. And so that not just because and eventually you get paid. Eventually you get paid when you do it because
Yeah, you get paid
if
either
you
way.
love what you're doing, it'll work out. But if you're just doing it for the almighty dollar, then it kind of shows sometimes.
You can definitely tell.
But everybody's got to eat. But
Yeah, I mean,
every musician's got to get paid, and it's hard to get paid. So I understand. Like once you're in that position, you probably do want to get paid. But
yeah, and if I feel like, yeah, if you're doing a feature on a song from an artist that you don't really care about or you don't really like enjoy their music and you're getting paid like $2 million
yeah,
for it,
well, I think
I
like
could definitely see myself, like even myself, I would just phone it in. Be like, yeah, sure.
yeah, well, that's what happens when you kind of go on, autopilot and just let the career kind of take flight.
Yeah, I can definitely see that being
Yeah, I mean,
a danger.
that's always the danger in the industry. I think sometimes is that's what happens. You lose the fire in your belly. You kind of just start doing stuff, and then you can dilute.
You get a little
But
too
then you can even
comfortable.
dilute the market because if you start making too many things like that, And then people start
Yeah.
looking at your reputation. It's like, okay, is he really serious, or what is he doing? So
Yeah.
then you get the newer artists that suddenly start being paid attention to, like an Earl. Like Earl,
Yeah.
you don't see Earl selling his stuff for like Coke ads or Pepsi ads.
Yeah, no.
you know,
I think I would definitely see Earl in a new light if he was out here doing like
yeah,
Chick-fil-A
he's not
ads.
doing that. But you get these guys that running kind of underground or get that legitimacy, and legitimacy doesn't mean you have to make no money. But
Yeah,
it's just like an
exactly.
artistic vision that when you see this artist, they consistently have a certain level of quality to what they're doing, and they kind of
Yeah, and even stuff that other people would consider like sellouty. Sometimes I see like artists working with brands and making like commercials. If they do it in the way that the artist does it, sometimes it can be really
yeah,
funny. Like if you've ever seen Vince Staples like Pepsi
yeah. If you do
ads,
it right, you can.
those are
Yeah. Some
hilarious.
things that you could do, like if you make sure you have like artist input, you're not just being run by a director. That you actually have some.
Yeah, you're not just like saying
Yeah,
the
you
lines
actually
there and
come in there and
dipping.
you say, "I got an idea. Can I do this?" Then at
Yeah,
least you're being involved, and you want to maintain your brand, and you want to maintain your image. So you do something that is going to be iconic, or within what you're doing.
yeah.
There's not a problem with that. It's just if you find yourself getting used and you're not really having input, then I think that is a different thing. But
Yeah, that definitely makes me sad. Uh, but if I see someone who's just like making their buck with an ad, and the ad is like funny, and they actually had an input, I'm like, yeah,
yeah,
do
but
it.
that just shows you want to be taken seriously and that you're being considered as a full artist.
Yeah,
Maybe eventually become an actor, or you start branching into other things. Can you show some willingness to try to reinvent yourself? Like if you're an artist and you start getting into
absolutely.
acting and you're a musician, you're stretching yourself, which is not a bad thing if you can do it.
Yeah, and there's certainly people out there who have the skills. I mean, look at like Don Glover, Childish
Yeah.
Gambino.
There's a lot of artists. I mean, even back in the day, like Ice-T, he was a hardcore rapper, and then he's on Law and Order.
Yeah, he's on Law and Order.
you
Yeah,
know,
he's my favorite Law and Order
yeah,
character
it's like
too.
you see,
He's always so confused about everything, even though he's been there for like 30 years. He's been on the force. There's that, yeah. If you know John Mulaney, the comedian, he has a skit about that where he says, yeah, Ice-T has been on the force for like 25 years, but people still have to explain to him what like pedophilia is.
yeah. Also, it's just interesting that he started off being such a radical like rapper, and then he became a cop. And knowing the history
Yeah,
of
it's
of
it's
his lyrics, it's like, really,
yeah,
you're a cop?
definitely. Vince Staples talks about that in an interview I saw recently, where he was like, yeah, the final sellout point for any like powerful young black rapper is playing a cop on TV.
Yeah, becoming a cop. Like I thought he didn't like cops.
Yeah.
But that's what happens. But I think yeah, this was a cool interview, and what we're gonna do is we are part of Spotify, and so this will
Hmm.
go out onto Spotify, but it also goes out onto 11 other platforms, and so you'll be out there on like Apple and Google Play and all these other platforms. I'll
Cool.
send you as many links as possible as they get published. And
Sure.
also, what's cool is on Instagram you can highlight this episode, and it will actually link to the Spotify podcast. So
Oh,
I will
cool.
actually do that on my Instagram and promote
Hmm.
this for how many days I ever promote. I usually promote for a couple weeks, and so that yeah, and then you can do the same thing on your Instagram if you want to, if you have a Spotify.
Yeah, I mean, I'll definitely tell people about like where to
Yeah,
find it.
yeah, and then when you make the highlights, so people can just click it, it goes right to it. So it's an active hyperlink. And then
Cool.
will include your Spotify hyperlink um, to this podcast. So it'll be actually a clickable link.
Oh,
So
thank you.
they'll go right to
Appreciate
your
that.
page on Spotify. And if you have any other pages you want to be on the podcast, let me know in the next hour and just send them to
Okay.
me, and then I can include them.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think for now, the Spotify would be
Okay,
perfect
so
since uh everything that I
everything's there.
release on other stuff, yeah, is on there except for I think like my first album, but nobody needs to hear
That's cool. All right,
that.
that's what we'll do. And thank you for being on the show, Shoefinger. Everybody, go out to Spotify and listen to his latest material. We're gonna have the links up on this, so you can go do it from this podcast once it gets published. And we'll talk to you. We usually talk to artists when they have additional releases. So if you want to push your new releases, get in touch with us, and we could have an episode about that.
Sure. All right. Thank
Okay,
you very
thank you.
much. This was
Thank you.
nice.
Have a good night. Yeah,
Have a
good
good
day.
day.
Hey, day.
Night.
Depends on which zone you're in. Okay, bye.
Yeah.